Okay, so today we're going to be looking at something maybe you haven't thought much about, street sweeping.
Yeah,
But trust me, the connection between street sweeping and clean water, it's way more interesting than you might think.
it really is.
We've got some great sources for this deep dive. A meeting transcript with tons of expert opinions, a presentation with some really cool visuals, and even some articles from worldsweeper.com.
That's right.
So we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty here. And hopefully by the end, you'll be as fascinated by street sweeping as I am.
Yeah.
So maybe we should start with like the most basic question. We all know street sweepers, they keep things tidy. But how are they the first line of defense for clean water?
Right. Well, everyday things like brake dust, oil, fertilizers, even little pieces of plastic, they all end up on the streets. And these contain pollutants like phosphorus and nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And when it rains, all that stuff gets washed into the storm drains and eventually flows into our rivers and lakes and oceans.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not good.
So I guess that's where the sweepers come in, right?
Exactly. Street sweepers, they're like big brooms, basically, and they stop those pollutants from reaching our waterways. And this isn't a new idea either. The meeting transcript actually mentions this guy, Ranger Kidwell-Ross. He's been talking about this since the early 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, back then, most people just thought street sweeping was about, making the streets look nice. But he was one of the first to see how important it was for the environment.
That's so cool, like a clean water pioneer.
Huh.
But I'm also seeing a lot about how cost-effective street sweeping is in this transcript. Is it really that much cheaper than other ways of managing stormwater?
Oh, yeah. The numbers are pretty crazy. For example, there's data from Florida that shows street sweeping costs about $189 per pound for removing nitrogen,
Oh,
but other treatments can cost like $37,000 a pound.
whoa, $37,000.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference. No wonder they call it the lowest hanging fruit.
Right.
But, okay, let's say I'm a city planner and I'm looking at this data. How do I know I'm actually getting the best results for my money? Like, how do we even know how well these sweepers actually work?
That's where testing comes in. And it's a lot more scientific than you might think.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work?
So we've got some really good info from this guy, Roger Sutherland. He's got over 40 years of experience designing and conducting sweeper tests. And his presentation slides show exactly how they do it.
So walk me through it.
Okay, so first, they create what they call a street dirt simulant. It's basically a mix of stuff that's like what you'd find on a real street.
Okay.
And they spread a specific amount of it on a test track. Then they let the sweepers do their thing and then analyze how much of the debris is picked up.
So it's like a controlled experiment just for street sweepers.
Exactly. And they even did tests under a giant tent in Illinois just to make sure it was totally dry and there wasn't any, like real world stuff affecting the results.
Wow, they really go all out. And what's the point of all this?
Well, they use the data to compare different sweeper models, and they also use it to calculate something called stormwater credits for cities.
Stormwater credits. What are those?
Basically, it's like points for keeping your water clean. The more pollutants a city removes through street sweeping, the more credits they get. And these credits can actually be really valuable. Cities can use them to meet environmental regulations or sometimes even, make some money.
Oh, so there's a real financial incentive for cities to like take street sweeping seriously.
Exactly.
So we've got the science, we've got the incentives, but I'm also seeing some discussion in this meeting transcript about like the lack of a standard way of testing these sweepers. What's the problem there?
Yeah, that's a big challenge for the whole industry. Without consistent testing, it's hard to compare results from different studies or even from different places.
It's like comparing apples and oranges.
Exactly. And it makes some people who work on stormwater issues, a little skeptical. In fact, Ranger Kidwell-Ross, the guy we talked about before, he actually called one of the tests the South Coast Air Quality Management District test. He called it a joke. Yeah. He said it was more about air quality than stormwater runoff, and that it was so easy to pass that basically any sweeper could do it.
That doesn't seem very helpful.
No, not really.
And I'm also seeing something here about like a situation in LA where they had a sweeper that wasn't maintained very well, and it ended up making the results look bad for a whole type of sweeper.
Right. And that's another reason why it's so important to have fair and consistent testing. If the equipment isn't working right, or the conditions aren't the same everywhere, then the results won't be accurate.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like this lack of a unified standard is like really holding the industry back. I mean, if the data isn't solid, how can we convince people that street sweeping is worth investing in?
That's a great point. We need to be able to show people the data and say, look, this really works. Yeah.
Exactly. So we've established that accurate testing is, like, super important. But what are we actually testing for? Like, what are the pollutants we're most concerned about? And you know me, I love a good aha moment. Are there any surprising sources of these pollutants that we might not even be thinking about?
You bring up a really good point. And there is something that might surprise you. Something as simple as leaves can actually be a major source of pollution.
Leaves. Really? I thought we were talking about, like, oil and heavy metals and stuff like that.
Those are definitely a problem. But organic material, like leaves, they can be just as bad. When they break down in the water, they release nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen.
Oh, so it's all connected. So those leaves on the street,
Yeah,
they become the food for algae blooms and stuff like that.
exactly. And there's this guy, James Hole, from the UNH Stormwater Center. He talks about this in the meeting transcript. He says that in the Northeast, where he works, something like 60 to 70% of the phosphorus that gets into the water comes from fallen leaves.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, and most of that happens in the fall.
So when we're talking about street sweeping and clean water, we can't just focus on the obvious stuff, like trash and dirt. We have to think about the leaves, too.
Absolutely. And that means that cities need to time their sweeping to match when the leaves are falling, especially in the fall.
Right. So back to the sweepers themselves. You mentioned different types earlier. Can you break those down for me again?
Sure, the most common type is the mechanical broom sweeper. They use rotating brushes to sweep the debris into a container. They're great for general street cleaning, but they're not always that good at getting the really small particles, the ones that have the pollutants.
So good for big stuff, but maybe not so much for the tiny stuff. What else is there?
Then you have vacuum sweepers. They use suction to pull the debris up, including the small particles,
Okay,
and they tend to be a lot better at capturing those pollutants.
got it. So I've got brushes, we've got vacuums. What's next?
And then there are regenerative air sweepers. These use a powerful stream of air to loosen up the debris and then suck it up into a container. They're known for being very efficient, especially with the fine particles, so they're a great option for managing stormwater.
Okay, so brushes, vacuums, and airstreams. It's like a whole arsenal of cleaning technology.
Right.
But I'm guessing choosing the right sweeper is a bit more complicated than just picking your favorite way to clean.
Yeah, definitely. Cities need to consider what kind of pollutants they're dealing with, the types of streets they have, and of course their budget.
That makes sense. You wouldn't use a feather duster to clean up a construction site.
Exactly.
But there's something else I've been wondering about. We talk about those stormwater credits and how they're based on how much pollution is removed. But how do we actually measure that? Are we talking about, like, weighing truckloads of street debris?
Sometimes it is that simple. In the transcript, there's a hydrologist named Mike Trojan. He specializes in stormwater pollution, and he describes something called a mass-based approach. Basically, they collect all the debris the sweepers pick up, and they weigh it after it's dried out. And then they use data on how much pollution is usually in street debris to figure out how much pollution was removed.
So it's like a street sweeper science experiment. Weigh the debris, figure out what's in it, and bam, you know how much pollution you got rid of.
Pretty much.
Okay, so let's say I'm a city planner and I'm totally on board with using street sweeping to improve water quality. Where do I even start? Is it just a matter of sending the sweepers out more often?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. It's not just about how often you sweep, it's about when and where you sweep.
Okay, so what kind of things would go into that planning?
Well, cities might want to sweep more often in areas with a lot of traffic or industrial activity, because that's where you find more pollutants like heavy metals and oil.
Right.
And they might also want to focus on areas with steep slopes or places that are close to rivers and lakes,
Right.
because the pollutants can wash into the water more easily in those areas.
So it's about finding the places where the pollution is the worst and focusing your efforts there.
Exactly. And that mass-based approach we talked about, that's really helpful for this because it encourages cities to really focus on getting as much pollution as possible. They get rewarded for actually removing the pollutants, not just for driving the sweepers around.
It's not just about how often you sweep, it's about how much you actually pick up.
That's right.
That seems like a much better way to measure success.
It is. And having all this data helps cities track their progress, and it also helps them figure out how to make their sweeping programs even better. And it shows that they're serious about improving water quality.
So it's a win-win for everyone.
Definitely.
So we've got targeted sweeping, data-driven approaches, and the right sweepers for the job. It sounds like the science behind all this is pretty solid.
Yeah, it's getting better all the time.
But we can't forget about that big issue we talked about earlier, the lack of a standard way to test these sweepers.
That's right. That's still one of the biggest challenges for the industry. It causes inconsistencies, it makes some people skeptical, and it makes it harder to convince everyone that street sweeping is a good way to control stormwater.
So where do we go from here? How do we fix this and really make street sweeping a key part of keeping our water clean?
Well, one idea is to bring everyone together, all the people involved in street sweeping. In the meeting transcript, Ranger Kidwell-Ross talks about creating a National Sweeper Manufacturers Association. He thinks that would be a great way to tackle this problem head on.
That sounds like a good idea. Having everyone working together to set standards for the whole industry. That could make a big difference. Not just for testing, but also for encouraging research and development, and for getting more people to use street sweeping.
Right, it's about making sure everyone's on the same page and working together to make street sweeping better.
I could see how that would be a game changer. If the industry had a unified voice, they could really get the message out about how important street sweeping is for the environment and for saving money.
Exactly.
Imagine them talking to politicians, getting more funding for street sweeping programs.
Yeah.
Working with cities to create consistent rules everywhere. It could really raise the profile of the whole field.
It's about changing the way people think about street sweeping.
Right now, a lot of people just see it as something that makes the streets look nice. But we need to show them that it's a crucial part of protecting the environment.
Exactly.
And that takes a coordinated effort. Everyone needs to be working together. And speaking of perceptions, there's another big obstacle that came up in the meeting transcript. Public awareness. It seems like a lot of people just don't understand the connection between street sweeping and clean water.
I think that's understandable. I mean, the pollutants we're talking about are usually too small to see, and most people don't spend their days thinking about how street sweeping protects their rivers and lakes.
It's out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly.
It's easy to think, okay, I like it when the streets are clean. But what does that have to do with the water I drink?
Yeah. And that's why public education is so important.
We need to make that connection between street sweeping and water quality clearer and more relatable.
Yeah.
Show people how the stuff on their streets can end up in their water or how it can harm the fish they might want to eat.
Right.
Give them a reason to care. Make it personal.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, it's our actions that make a difference.
Yeah.
Whether it's putting our trash in the right place or moving our cars for street cleaning, those things all add up.
They really do.
And we shouldn't forget about technology. We already talked about how it's making sweeping more efficient, but it can also help us get people involved. Remember that app that Ranger Kidwell-Ross mentioned? The one that would let people know when the sweepers are coming?
Oh, yeah. That's a great idea.
That would be the end of parking nightmares. And I bet it would really help people follow the parking rules for street cleaning.
I think so, too.
And it would also make people more aware of what's going on. If they see that people are working hard to keep their streets and water clean,
Right.
they might be more likely to understand and support it.
It's all about making that connection.
So we've talked about the challenges, but let's end on a positive note. What are some of the most exciting things happening in the street sweeping industry? What do you see for the future?
Well, one thing that's really promising is the development of even better sweeping technology. We've already come a long way with those regenerative air sweepers, but there's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
For example, finding ways to use less water in the systems that keep the dust down.
Oh yeah, that dust suppression thing. That really stuck with me from the meeting transcript. It seems kind of weird that spraying water would actually make it harder to pick up pollutants.
It does seem counterintuitive, but those water sprays can actually make the small particles stick together, and that makes them harder to pick up.
Huh.
Plus, using water to control dust can actually contribute to water pollution itself.
Wow. It's like you're trying to solve one problem, but you're creating another one.
Yeah, exactly. So finding ways to control dust without using water or using less water, that's a really important area for innovation.
Definitely. What else is on the horizon?
Another cool thing is that with all the advancements in sensors and data analysis, we might be able to create much more efficient sweeping routes.
Oh, so
Imagine sweepers that can automatically change their routes based on things like the weather, traffic, and even the types of pollutants in different areas.
it's like a smart thermostat for street sweepers.
Yeah, kinda.
They learn and adapt.
That's right.
That's awesome.
And as we collect more data about how well street sweeping works, those stormwater credits we talked about will become even more valuable. And that will give cities an even bigger reason to invest in good sweeping programs. So it's good for everyone.
It really is. So to all our listeners out there, Next time you see a street sweeper going down the road, I hope you'll see it a little differently. It's not just about keeping the streets clean. It's about protecting our water.
That's right.
And it's a reminder that even something as ordinary as street sweeping can make a big difference for the environment.
Absolutely.
By supporting efforts to improve street sweeping technology, raise awareness, and advocate for better policies, we can all help to create healthier and cleaner communities.
That's a great way to put it.
It's all about seeing how everything is connected.
Exactly.
And it's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of street sweeping.